One super cool thing about my yoga teacher training experience is that it was centered around veganism. Ahimsa, being the first principle of yoga, means nonviolence and having compassion for ourselves and others. So to live in alignment with these yogic principles, it only makes sense to be vegan. Another huge focus in our training was eating a whole foods plant-based diet. Because if you think about self-love, this should involve nourishing yourself with the best, highest quality source of fuel. We did a lot of reading and studying nutrition, and one of the books that we were required to read was How Not to Die by Dr. Michael Greger. What I love about Dr. Michael Greger is that he's incredibly thorough with his research, and his claim to fame is that he's read every single study that has been published in a peer-reviewed medical journal on the subject of nutrition. And no, he was not an ethical vegan who sought out to prove that animal products were unhealthy for us. He was motivated by his grandmother, who was diagnosed with end-stage heart disease, and thankfully, by the advice of her extremely competent doctor, she switched her diet to whole plant foods and was able to reverse heart disease and live another 20 years. Despite the fact that we had found the cure for heart disease, this information was being suppressed by the medical field. So Dr. Greger dedicated his life to reading every nutrition study to date and educating other people on this subject. The next book we were assigned to read was Healthy at 100 by John Robbins, which was the inspiration behind making this video. I loved this book so much. It was also incredibly well researched, and the information aligns with everything that Michael Greger had discovered as well. How Not to Die outlines the top 15 causes of death in the Western world and how we can greatly reduce our risk of succumbing to them by switching to a whole foods plant-based diet. But Healthy at 100 outlines several case studies on some of the longest living populations. So he looked at cultures where they had a very high number of centenarians, so people who were living past the age of 100, and analyzed their diet and lifestyle habits. In the introduction, he talks about how we have this really warped and negative perception of aging in the West. We assume that a lot of these afflictions that we see our grandparents and older relatives suffering from are inevitable parts of the aging process. Some things like wrinkles and gray hair are inevitable, but losing our mobility and mental faculties is not. Things we normally associate with old age, like Alzheimer's, heart disease, certain types of cancers, these are largely avoidable. Genetics do play a role, but they are not the cause. Even if you have a bad family medical history, there are steps you can take today to prevent suffering later down the line. In Western cultures, the elderly are sadly seen as like a burden on society. They are often placed in assisted living homes because they struggle to do basic daily activities on their own. Just think of some of the adjectives that we associate with old age. Frail, senile, grouchy. This kind of paints a picture, right? And the media is definitely influencing us as well. We're so hyper obsessed with youth and physical beauty, and we're terrified of aging. Think of the majority of advertisements that we see everywhere. So number 1, unhealthy food, fast food. Number 2, prescription drugs. Number 3, makeup, hair care, skin care, anti-aging creams. We're just bombarded with this crap. And what does this tell us about our society? An overweight and overworked population does not age well. In the cultures that John Robbins analyzes, however, the elderly are revered. Young people enjoy spending time with them because they're wise and inspiring, and visiting with grandparents is not viewed as an obligation. The thought of getting old isn't scary. He also makes a distinction between lifespan and health span. Our lifespan here in the West has increased significantly thanks to modern medicine, but what good is living longer if the last decade of your life is going to be completely miserable? If not totally miserable, our quality of life is reduced significantly. I've had quite a few people say to me that they don't want to live past 70. This always baffled me, but if you think about it, a lot of the people in their lives, almost all of them that have lived past the age 70, are suffering. And they don't want to suffer in that way, so they would rather just die. They say it's the quality of your years, not the quantity, right? But it's crazy that people see no other alternative. That's why I loved this book so much, is it really illustrates that you can live well into your 90s without your quality of life really diminishing at all. I've seen firsthand how much my grandparents' health has declined in the past several years, and I don't want to follow in their footsteps. One common thread among these blue zones, which are geographical regions throughout the world where the people live much longer than average, is that they're all eating predominantly whole plant foods with minimal meat, animal products, or packaged foods. Their diets are centered around fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds. Most people think that they eat animal products in moderation, because they're like, oh yeah, like I eat vegetables and fruits and I eat meat, but like not that much. So to be completely clear about what this means, scientifically speaking, these populations were eating 90% of their calories from whole plant foods. And some of these cultures were only eating meat like a couple times a year at some ceremony. Since people have such a hard time conceptualizing numbers, I thought I'd break it down mathematically. So say you eat 3 meals a day, there's 7 days in a week, 3 times 7 is 21. 21 times 0.9 is around 18.9, which rounds up to 19. 19 of the 21 meals throughout your week should be exclusively whole plant foods. Now, do I eat this healthy? Not quite, especially not lately, but it's a good goal to strive for, you know? So say a relative of yours has Alzheimer's disease. Can you honestly say that they were eating less than 2 servings of meat per week? Very doubtful. Alzheimer's disease is essentially heart disease, but in your brain. So these plaques are building up in your cerebral arteries, preventing blood flow. And this is caused by eating a diet that's high in saturated fat and cholesterol, which are found in animal products and not so much in plants. Scientists were able to identify the specific gene that is a genetic precursor to Alzheimer's called the ApoE4 gene. Paradoxically, this gene is most prevalent in Nigerian men, yet Nigeria has some of the lowest rates of Alzheimer's. And what do you know? They eat predominantly plants. John Robbins not only analyzed the diet of these cultures, but their overall lifestyle habits. I feel like I'm stating the obvious, but exercise is so fundamental to both physical and mental health. Unfortunately, many Americans have extremely sedentary lifestyles, and our bodies are designed to move. Inactivity is just a recipe for immobility later in life. This was one of the primary motivations I had in starting a regular yoga practice, because I want to be fucking spry when I'm 97 years old. I want to be able to just pop up into a handstand or go for a 5-mile hike. We think that just going to the gym for an hour after sitting at a desk all day is gonna somehow make up for it. But just like you can't make up for a sleep deficit on the weekends, it doesn't work this way. We need to be stretching and moving our bodies throughout the day. Personally, I'm glad canvassing requires a lot of walking and standing, but if you do have a desk job, just make it a point to stand up every 10 minutes or so, do a little stretching, and just go walk around as often as you can. So many people abandon certain physical activities when they reach a certain age because they're culturally conditioned to do so. Like, I met this woman, for example, when I was working in Sedona, and I was making small talk, asked her if she did a lot of hiking. And she turned to her husband and was like, you know, we used to hike a lot, but we don't do that anymore. And it was heavily implied because, you know, they're getting old, but they were only in like their 50s or 60s at the most. So I didn't express this, of course, but it made me sad because you should never think that you're too old to go hiking. One point that he really stresses in this chapter is that the day you stop exercising is the day you decide to start dying. Of course, your physical fitness will decline to some degree as you age, but to a large degree this happens because people quit their fitness routines. And being able-bodied is not something that we should take for granted. In the last couple chapters, he talks about stress and social relationships. Western societies tend to be a lot more individualistic, while these cultures that he's looking at are more collectivist. There's a lot of evidence that more individualistic societies foster these feelings of isolation, which can have very detrimental effects on our physical health. And in combination, there's a lot of evidence showing that positive, strong social connections can improve our physical health. The biggest takeaway from this book is that we really need to approach health from a holistic perspective. It's not just about your diet or your exercise routine, but everything in combination. I mean, duh, right? Everybody knows that a healthy diet and exercise are essential for health and longevity, but most people have a very vague concept of what these things actually mean. We are so confused about what constitutes a healthy diet because of all this misinformation in the media, and our idea of what a healthy and active lifestyle is warped because we're comparing ourselves to an extremely unhealthy population. We may be healthier than average, but that does not necessarily mean healthy. My grandma has pretty debilitating emphysema to where she has to walk around connected to an oxygen machine. And she's always telling my siblings and I not to smoke because we'll end up like her. So she realizes that, or she accepts the fact that her decisions in the past, smoking cigarettes for decades, has caused her breathing issues. It is known and accepted in society that cigarettes are terrible for our health. But this was not always the case. I mean, there was a time when people didn't have a clue. And then when scientists got a clue, it took 50 years for the general public to accept the truth. So while my grandma accepts this, she does not accept the fact that my grandpa's poor health was caused by his eating habits. Obviously, it seems cruel to blame individuals for their poor health, so I think that we should be placing the blame on the industries that are pushing misinformation on us. This includes the meat and dairy industry, the sugar and processed food industry, the pharmaceutical industry. I think even the beauty industry is to blame for pushing this idea that we must look youthful forever and perpetuating this negative association with aging. You can see how this attitude starts to become a self-fulfilling prophecy as people start to age. This video is not meant to be a moral condemnation of people with poor lifestyle habits. It's more of a presentation of the facts for you to take as you wish. If you want to maintain a certain quality of life, if you want to be fit enough to go hiking and skiing in your 90s, then these are just some things to take into consideration. So to answer the question, is veganism the fountain of youth? No, because veganism is not a diet, it's an ethical stance against the exploitation of animals. But a whole foods, plant-based diet in combination with exercise, getting enough sleep, limiting drugs and alcohol, maintaining positive social relationships, and minimizing stress will greatly extend your health span and you'll age like a fine wine. And personally, I would take the fountain of wisdom over the fountain of youth. Thank you so much for watching. Please give this video a thumbs up and leave your thoughts down below.
Yo, how when me eat them, I wonder when me eat. When me tell them say me nah eat no fish, nah no meat now. How when me eat them, I wonder when me yam. When me tell them say that I'm a vegan man. How when me eat them, I wonder when me eat. When me tell them say me nah eat no fish, nah no meat now.